Good morning, Eun Joo. How are you doing?
Good morning, David, Pete. I'm doing well, thank you.
We couldn't think of a better person to start off our podcast than with you in terms of just I think how well we know you, and I think just your passions and just the way that who you are. And so we felt like this was a great jumping point.
Thank you very much. I'm very honored.
Eun Joo, you and I, we got to know each other, I think, back in 2017 when you were one of the first speakers for an Asian American theology conference that I helped organize at Princeton Seminary. But I may not know all of your life history and background. So here's the kind of it's a big question, but maybe let the spirit guide you into focusing on a particular vignette if possible. But who are you? Help us get to know you. Maybe share one chapter of your history that folks may not know. It could be related to your family, immigration history, and your faith journey. And the point of this question is we just want to know what makes it tick.
What makes me tick? Usually I tell people I guess my elevator speech is that I am a child of grace and a product of prayer. That being a PK, I have had the privilege of growing up in the church, but being the recipient of the prayer not only of my parents, but of my grandparents and all the church members. I mean, that's like one of the added benefits. I know there's some burdens that come with being a PK, and that's another story. But to have various generations of people, 권사님s, and that's a term in Korean churches. It literally means exhorters, but they're the prayer warriors of any church. To deacons and elders and just basic church members who have adopted me as their child or sister. And to luxuriate in that, I don't claim anything to be my own. Everything is the grace of God, which is actually my name in Chinese characters. 은혜, 은자, 두루, 주자. That's part of the word grace, and 두루, 주자, meaning everywhere or everything. So everything is the grace of God for me. And I really believe that and wanted to live that out throughout my short 50 some odd plus years. I think in terms of immigration, I came relatively earlier than some folks. My mother came in 1972, and then 6 months later, my father came. My father was a pastor, and so he founded a church in Buffalo. And then a year later, myself, I'm the oldest of three. Myself, my younger brother, about 2 years younger, and my younger sister, about 4 years younger than me. We came by ourselves, and so I still remember that my maternal grandparents took care of us during that time. And so at the airport, Gimpo Airport at that time, we didn't have Incheon. And at that time, many folks felt that when you immigrated to another country that you would never see them again. So it's like this, and crying, and in this lifetime we will see each other or not. So my grandfather asked somebody who was on the same flight to just make sure that we transferred to the plane in Buffalo once we got to JFK, just so that would go smoothly. And my parents said that when they were waiting for us in Buffalo, like we didn't come out. And so basically all of us were like asleep. And so they had to come in and wake us. But the fun part of that is my grandparents in our nice little suits that, we got for this trip, they wrote down the address of my parents in Buffalo on pieces of cloth, and then they sewed it onto us. I figured just in case we got lost somewhere, in flight or maybe in JFK, that they would know where to kind of, not mail us, but, fly us into. So that's my immigration background. And so I was in Buffalo for just a couple months. And then in early 75, we all came down to New York City, where I have been living for the past 48 years. Since we moved from Buffalo.
I'm imagining you and your sisters getting on that plane and then getting off in Buffalo and then doing that, and then having been in New York City. That's kind of I'm from the East Coast originally, and now I live in Texas. But I think going to New York is always kind of a dream, and the fact that you've literally lived your entire life in New York City is fascinating, and really amazing. And the fact that you've been in being a PK, you've been at churches and serving and growing up in churches in New York City. I'm trying to get a picture of what that might have been like. Yeah, how was the churches? How was church life? How did that kind of shape you and form you as you were growing up in Korean American churches in New York?
So I have a special place in my heart for PKs because I don't know how it is these days, but growing up, it was like walking a tightrope, because you had to be the model student. But if you were damned if you do and damned if you didn't, in the sense that if you did something well, there was always the possibility they were like, oh, look at that PK showing off. And if you didn't do anything well, there was this thing of like, but you're a PK, you should be able to do this well. Why aren't you up to par? And so I think that's a tightrope. And in many ways, our father's ministry or maybe our mother's ministry, it wasn't anything that we signed up for. We just happened to be the children of pastors. And, also I feel for pastor spouses, particularly 사모님들, the wives of pastors, because like there's this unspoken and sometimes spoken expectations and burden. And so I think I tend to categorize broadly. They're the rebellious PKs, and they're like, I'm not going to do what my father tells me to. And then there's the goody two shoes, like, trying to help out. And I think I fell sort of into the latter one at that time. I don't know, again, not so much now, but we were like the fillers and the substitutes, right? So if there was a need, as I got older, for a Sunday school teacher, hey, go fill that spot, substitute or do that for a semester or two. As I got older, my father passed away when I was 16, but I continued to work in the church with the PK kind of mind. So when there was a need, like, oh yeah, well, go drive the van. So I think those kinds of expectations were what shaped. And then for some people, they would like run away from it. But for me, I was able to enjoy it and embrace it. And so that has been my PK lifestyle. But I always say when I meet PKs that we should have a support group, and talk about our various stories.
So Eun Joo, say more about the connections here between your early immigrant, that vivid flight from Gimpo Airport to JFK to Buffalo, that kind of that's not an easy trip for young children to make. How does the early life migration experience with your involvement in church life, like why did you decide to stay in the Korean church? Many people want to grow out of it, but it sounds like you have maintained a connection to that kind of community. So maybe I'd love to hear some of your reflections on this.
I think in terms of adapting to a new culture and country, I was fortunate enough to come to this country when I was 6, going on 7. I think it really does matter what age you come to this country in terms of being able to adapt and balance. Even though I came like young enough where I could consider myself more second generation, I always say I'm a 1.5 generation, because I think I've retained a lot of the Korean culture and language, largely due to the immigrant community that was very vibrant in the 80s in the Korean American church context. And so I give my biculturalism to the fact that I was part of the Korean American church. My father passed away when I was 16. And so maybe that has added to why I became a pastor. Being a PK, you see how the sausage is made oftentimes, and it could turn people off, like, oh, there's the duplicity of that elder, he just cursed out my father, but now he's in front, acting as if he's holier than thou. But also, I saw my father, despite all the aggravations and trials and tribulations, just dealing with people overall, I think is very hard. But, with so many great needs in the immigrant community in the 70s and 80s, but he enjoyed it, visitations was a big thing during those days, right? You went to all the church members' houses, you visited them at their work as well as their homes. It was tiring, but he enjoyed it. And also he had a great sense of humor. What I really appreciate my father in doing was that even though we were a pastor's family with certain expectations from the members of the church. He took time out for us to go play or go have vacations. Meaning, I know church pastors' families during that time that never took a vacation, that never went anywhere. But we did, but it was adapted to the church schedule. So if we back then we had Wednesday night services, right? Friday night services, and early morning prayer meetings. So if we ever left anywhere as a family, we would leave like Sunday night, and we had to make sure that we came back by Wednesday because they had Wednesday night services, or we would do one-day trips. So I grew up in the church, and in some ways, after my father passed away, our family continued to go to that church. And if my father had still lived, I don't know if I would have gone to seminary, because there was some talk of us moving back to Korea. If my father still had lived, I don't think I would have been able to work at the church I grew up in. I mean, because you can't serve as a seminarian, serve at a church that your father is the head pastor at. And so I think there was a sense of like, okay, what am I going to do after I graduate? Okay, I love God and I love God's people. I guess I should go to seminary. So for me, I never had this conversion experience or God calling with lightning saying, hey, you better go to seminary. Or I do remember, in youth group, like all these people, when they had these amazing testimonials, like, my life was like this, but then God flipped me over and now I'm going like this. And I'm like, I don't have that. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of 모태신앙 folks who grew up from early childhood, from the mother's womb in the church, like there's this never Saul to Paul conversion experience that you could kind of tout in your testimonies. It was more like, oh man, what is my testimony? And I felt like, okay, mine isn't from Saul to Paul. It's more like Samuel. He grew up in the church. He grew up in the temple. And then he was allowed to hear God's voice sometimes, and it was just a organic, natural outgrowth of the sacrifice and dedication of his mother. And, I was able to go to seminary right after college to serve the church that I grew up in for 3 years, and then continue to do so in different capacities since then.
I want to pivot to one of your perhaps passion projects. And Pete and I were talking how we found it really cool that back at the Seattle conference, you gave a workshop on K-pop. So and then, earlier in your narrative, you spoke about you came to the US at a relatively young age. You were able to retain your kind of knowledge and experience of Korean culture and language. So kind of weave some of these threads into your interest, perhaps your passionate interest about K-pop. And let's begin by just asking, why did you kind of organize this workshop on K-pop for, Korean ministry people?
And before you answer, Eun Joo, get ready. But before you answer, I found it fascinating. And for our listeners, the conference in Seattle was for essentially all of the senior pastors or first-gen Korean American pastors within our denomination gathering all together. So Eun Joo was asked to do a seminar, and the seminar topic she chose was K-pop. And if anyone growing up with the Korean American church knows, that's not something they'd be generally interested in. And so to me, the dynamic of your choice of a topic, that's interesting, yes, but also stereotypically it wouldn't be that something, a first-gen senior pastor would be discussing at a conference of this nature is fascinating to me. And then I attended, obviously, the seminar, and it was amazing. But just why you decided to do that, for what reasons, and then I think like what message were you trying to get across? All that stuff is really fascinating to me.
Okay, I'm sorry we don't have 4 hours for this, but I'll try with the remaining time that we have. I grew up, I think pop music in the United States was best in the 1990s. Enough said, right? Okay, so despite how I look, I actually like hip hop, right? And I like R&B. And I think what America has done, and it needs to own up to this, is that they've shared their gifts to the world, and the world has enriched it. I think also going back to 70s, when there was a whole bunch of people, young people, who were struggling with their identity. And so a part of that, struggle shown in bleaching their hair blonde and putting blue contact lenses, right? Because they want to look white. But I think with K-pop, it wasn't to look white. It was just a part of their expression. It shifted over the years. They didn't give up their Korean identity in order to try to be white. I'm just like blonding my hair because I choose to, not because I want to look, become more white. So that's a whole nother section. I am a believer that the church should not separate itself, from the world, as in like, it's us against them, which I think the Korean church has done. Anything secular, you're sinning, you better not, you shouldn't know the vernacular or the language. And so there's that part of the context in the Korean American church. I think the church should be at the intersection of community and culture, and be able to translate, interpret, appreciate, incorporate. And so you can't artificially separate. And so now you're coming to church, you get rid of all your worldly things. There's a quote from Martin Luther that goes something to the effect like, if you're a shoemaker, you don't become more Christian if you put crosses on the shoes. You are living out your faith if you make quality shoes, right? And I think everything comes down to this, I think people want to be seen and heard. That's what ministry is. You see them, you hear them, and then they feel like wow, I matter, or somebody's taking my word seriously. So what BTS or K-pop has done for those who grew up in the 70s, I'm like, oh, there's another Asian there. I watch MASH. I like Mr. Arnold in Happy Days. He was the only Asian there, right? So to kind of see yourself in the big screen or on television, that was like a major event. So I think there's a spoken and unspoken need for Asian Americans to be seen and heard in the society. In some ways, K-pop and BTS has made Asian Americans more seen and heard. For me, I think if I like something, I want everybody else to like it. One of my favorite definition of evangelism is when a beggar tells other beggars where they found bread, right? So it's like, oh, this is good. I got to share this. Some people could go, oh, this is good. I just want it only for myself. But I'm in the lane of, oh, this is good. I want everybody to know about it. Yeah, it was my Korean American 1.5 1990s music loving, proud of K-pop's growth person showing up in that seminar.
So Eun Joo, I think when I hear you, and as I've gotten to know you, you truly stand kind of in the gaps and you bridge lots of different things. This is the way that I really see you, and I appreciate you. A couple of follow-up questions, and we don't have that much time, but one is, how do you feel like the first gen received that seminar? And then the second thing that I really resonate with is you said, we all want to be seen and heard, which I think we all, obviously understand. There's a moment where you feel seen and heard by the first gen in the church, and I have stories and moments like that. But I wonder if the K-pop angle or the passion for K-pop that you bring in was almost a plea for you to say, hey, first gen, you have to be able to see and hear the second gen.
I'm not sure how well received it was. I mean, people have said they enjoyed it. We need to use the different things given to us as platforms to help us plunge into other discussions. So I think that's an easy portal or gateway to get a conversation going. Because, something that as a first gen parent, you could go, oh, wow, my child is interested in something Korean for the first time in a long time, right? Like, to use that as a conversation starter, that's not going to be the full context. I think the goal is to get connection and relationship and mutual seeing and hearing of each other. So I just use these as the means, but not the goals, if I could say. Like, use the different things that could connect people to start a conversation going. But the goal ultimately is to see each other and to hear each other, to be seen and to be heard, to appreciate the fact that God has placed you in that particular family or in that particular church, or to appreciate the people that God has placed around you. I think that's the goal. Generally speaking, I have a K-pop corner in my monthly email to the clergy women, and I use that because I felt that was a safe, neutral topic for me to kind of like about, because even in the clergy women, there's a spectrum of theologies and political views. So I didn't want to touch anything that's going to rile up people, but I thought that this phenomenon that I enjoy is something that is neutral enough for people to kind of be able to use as a common point for discussion later on. So I mean, I use this strategically as well. But then, so it's a conversation starter, for people to think about immigration, for people to think about stereotypes that people have, for people to think about, what it means to work hard and, invest yourself in something that you have such a passion for. And if we only had 1/10 of that passion in our faith lives, how could we grow from that? Or, are you willing to sacrifice, 10 minutes of sleep so that you could get up earlier for whatever it is? And I always tell parents, like, they're so vested in this and they're so passionate. I'm like, honestly, these days, I'm so happy to see kids passionate about anything. So if they're passionate about golf, great, support them so that they can know how it feels to have passion, and maybe they could translate that into other areas of their lives. But yeah, so people, I remember I did a seminar like many years ago too, and about K-pop being sort of like, there was, I remember hearing a long time ago how like the 600 years of silence between, Old Testament and New Testament, that was when God was working through the Roman Empire to build roads so that the missionaries could use them later on, right? And so I was like, oh, what a great way of understanding what culture and society was doing. And I'm like, yeah, so let's use K-pop as the road that you could start a conversation of connecting with. It's just a road. It's not the goal or the end destination, but use what is available to you and know clearly what your end goal is, which is to connect and to build relationship.
We want to wind things up here, but I want to throw it back to you with this question. For our audience who's listening, who are inspired by your passion in K-pop, what can people take away for their context in terms of conversation starters, intergenerational conversation starters, things that provoke passions? If it's not K-pop, what else? Like, what are you seeing working in other ministry contexts that people could take inspiration from?
I don't have anything profound. I think for parents and also for younger generation, just have curiosity, humility to ask, like be willing to learn from the younger generation. It could be any topic, but I think if we could say, oh, like I never heard of that, or I wonder why you're liking this so much, or I think curiosity, humility, and respect are essential for any ministries and relationships, but I think particularly for youth ministry. Like there was a tendency of arrogance when missionaries went, we have something to give you, but more often than not, the missionaries were the ones who received from those that they were sent to give to. So I think if we had, again, this desire to connect by learning from those around you, and asking questions and showing enthusiasm and support. You don't have to like it, but you could ask, not to change folks. God does the changing, but I think if we are in authentic relationship with them, then they could trust when we have something to share. So yeah, again, nothing profound. I think it would just come to those aspects.
Eun Joo, we want to thank you so much. I know I'm blessed to know you, and I'm blessed to be able to serve alongside of you. And I really hope that many people will relate, but also just be inspired by your story, and that we can continue to connect in that way. So thank you again for joining us. It's been a fantastic, fantastic episode, and just a time of talking, and hopefully we'll do it again soon.
Thank you. Thank you.